the Christian Post had a guest editorial with the headline, "With DeSantis out, can a Christian support Donald Trump?" And that made me think, oh, well, they're having someone actually come in and try to, pros and cons, see where you come out. Maybe you shouldn't support Trump. Maybe you think it's okay. I'm not going to take a side, but here's some things to think about. That is not what it is. That is not what it is at all. The piece was written by Shane Eidelman, who's a pastor in Southern California somewhere, who basically says, you have to support Trump. Why do you have to support Trump? Because there's so much at stake, Sky. There's so much at stake. I love this first quote. If a leader, because this is, people say he lacks character. He lacks character. How could we support him when he has no Christian character? If a leader lacks Christian character, but is pointing the nation back to God, is that a bad thing? That's a pretty compelling argument. He lacks character, but he's pointing us back to God as a nation. So
it's a utilitarian argument, basically.
How? Caitlin, how? I don't know. God doesn't... I just have a few quotes from this piece because I just kept reading it and going, oh my gosh. God doesn't judge a nation based on the character of one man. He judges it based on the spiritual health of her people. So if Donald Trump is improving our spiritual health, then we're less likely to come under the judgment of God.
Caitlin, you got to say something already. You're just
that's
about to
so
explode.
Not true. That's so upsetting because that is so counter to how most of the Old Testament over and over and over again describes the relationship between the character of leaders and the health of a community and the judgment of God on communities. I mean, even just thinking, like, I could come up with more, obscure references to prove this. Like, I'm thinking of, I think in 1st and 2nd Kings, there's a few times this happens. I'm thinking of Manasseh, where it specifically says, like, not only did he lead the people into idolatry, but it says because of what he did, Israel is judged. Like, the whole of the community is judged because of what he did. But even with an example that people are more familiar with, like if you think about the story of David, right? Mm-hmm. All of the negative effects on the rest of his family for his sin against Bathsheba is disastrous for the whole community. Like the conflict between his sons, the kind of chaos in his whole community, like that is all directly described in that story as coming from God's judgment on his particular sinfulness. So I don't think we have any biblical reason to say that the character of our leaders does not produce judgment on whole communities. And also, we don't even need to have kind of a theological defense of this. We know from history that the way that leaders comport themselves has effects on the kind of culture of what's acceptable in a whole community. So even if you're thinking about the spiritual health of the whole nation, again, true in biblical history and true in actual history outside of scripture, tons of examples of like the way that a leader comports themselves causes people to think certain things are okay. We can even see that in our own country, the rhetoric that's become normalized because of the rhetoric of our leaders. There are Christian responses that we should have to not just the actions people have, but the language they use to talk about people made in the image of God. This isn't an abstract question. We know what has happened when leaders in our own country have used really terrible language to describe people made in the image of God. They have made that more possible for people in the country to use.
But, Caitlin, Sky, we cannot discuss every one of these points, both of you. So we have to take turns. Caitlin got that one. Okay. You can have the next one. Caitlin, you only think bad things about Donald Trump because you believe the news media. Here's our next point from our friends at the Christian Post. The majority of news outlets spin everything, yes, everything, to put Trump in a bad light. And I hope you realize this. They're talking directly to us now. I hope you realize this. They are really coming after you, me, and our Christian values. When the news media has negative stories about Donald Trump, what it really means is they're coming after our Christian values.
So when the news media reports that Donald Trump has been ordered to pay $83 million to E. Jean Carroll for sexual assault,
they want to take away my charity, my Christian charity. That's what they're coming for.
Right. Or when the news media shows video clips of Donald Trump making fun of people with physical handicaps,
they want to take away grace. They're coming after grace. I'm just picking the
Right.
Christian values they might be.
Right.
coming
Or
after.
when the media publishes photographs taken at Mar-a-Lago of boxes and boxes and boxes of classified material that Trump had accused Hillary Clinton of doing with her servers back in 2016 and said they should lock her up for mishandling national security secrets. But when
They're
he has them in the gilded bathroom at Mar-a-Lago, when the media publishes those pictures, that's them coming after
my Christian values.
Yeah. Okay.
They want to
thank
take
you.
away my. They want to take away my. Okay, an analogy that I often use will bring this point home. The head of a neighborhood, say Trump, he's like the head of a neighborhood watch program who took the late night watches, was occasionally gruff and impulsive, and sometimes his words were crass and offensive. But he watched over the neighborhood diligently each night. Each week, he invited church leaders into his home to pray for him and his family and to seek their advice. He stood against others on the neighborhood watch committee who wanted to enact policies harmful to the neighborhood and to the children, such as advocating an open door policy where residents were required to allow anyone into their homes at all hours of the day for handouts. Is this not the kind of person you would want leading your neighborhood watch?
How about when the leader of the neighborhood watch sexually assaults women because when you're the head of the neighborhood watch, they let you do it?
Oh,
Would you
snap.
still want that person in charge of the neighborhood watch?
Don't put it on that footing. Here's the bottom line. We can't have our cake and eat it too. I'm reading from this editorial. We can't have our cake and eat it too. There is no middle ground for Christians today. You can choose a president who will seek to destroy America and, parenthetically, in many ways, already has. Or you can choose to back Donald Trump. There's no plan B. There's no plan B. Trump
Can I just
or the end of America. Caitlin.
Can I just say, I think it's important actually hearing some of this, not
Yeah.
because this is the best argument for voting for Donald Trump, because it is absolutely not, but because I think it's important to realize that like people are often caught up in this logic. Like it is
Yes.
a very powerful argument. It
Yeah,
is
I'm not-
incredibly manipulative, but
I'm
it's
not
powerful.
bringing this up because it's a weird fringe outlier.
Right.
These are arguments that I've heard before.
Right. It's the existential threat America's on the brink,
Yes.
and therefore we should hire this
Yes.
less than ideal person to be president because the alternative is worse. They've
Only-
been
Yeah.
saying this since 2015.